Good afternoon, everybody. Or in the case of our wonderful speaker, Dr. Yang Qin, very early morning, good very early morning, because I think for Qin it's about 6 o'clock in the morning in the UK. As is characteristic and good about this university, we acknowledge the indigenous people on the land on which we work and live and hope and so forth. And we honor their elders past, present, and emerging. I'm also aware, though, that we have many people here who are coming from different land, not the land of the Ngunnawal people, which we are on in Canberra, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And so I would like to honor the indigenous people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are all meeting, and in particular welcome any indigenous people of Australia or other places to this seminar. It's a really very great pleasure to be hosting this seminar in the ANU China Seminar Series for a number of reasons. One is that it's always wonderful to welcome back one of our PhD students, in this case, Yang Qin, who graduated, in 2002, I think?
2022.
Yes, exactly. It's particularly nice when that PhD student was exemplary, and Yang Qin was, I think, our exemplary PhD student. A wonderful scholar, a wonderful human being, and a wonderful colleague. So it's particularly lovely that Yang Qin can be with us today. Her PhD was on the pictorial representations of the Confucian classics in Song, China, and was received extremely well. After completing her PhD here in Canberra, she won a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Nottingham in the UK on a Leverhulme-funded research project. You can actually see its title on the first slide there, Divine Saving in Greek and Chinese Polytheism. It's this is also another reason to be particularly pleased and proud of Yang Qin, because this project is being led by two people, Professor Theodore Jim from Nottingham and an old friend, Professor Vincent Gousset from the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris. It's great that Yang Qin is associating with such fine scholars in her postdoctoral career. And I know that as far as her project leaders are concerned, they're extremely pleased that Yang Qin joined their project. Since she's been in Nottingham, Yang Qin is becoming known to a wider audience, which is great, across Europe. And I believe she's already given seminars in Vienna and in Oxford and in Paris. And that's fantastic. Today's talk is part of that project. And it's entitled, as you know, Ritual Production of Divine Dreams in Ancient Greece and Song China. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing Qin speak, so I will not take any more time. What I will say is there will be time for questions afterwards. And if you would put those questions into the chat function of Zoom, I will field them and ask them to Qin when her talk finishes. So over to you, and thank you so much for making yourself available.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the very lovely, nice introduction. It's always a pleasure for me to engage again with scholars in ANU, and to see, always a pleasure to see my supervisors here and old friends from the ANU. So as Ben just introduced, now I'm working in this comparative project on Greek and Chinese polytheism. So from the very beginning, the project aim is to compare gods and divine modes of different modes of divine human interaction between those two cultures or religions. Basically, we focus on classical the ancient Greece during the 5th to 1st century BCE, and then from 10th to 15th centuries AD in Chinese religion. And the rationale for that comparison, that is the overarching idea, is to compare polytheism in its active period of, ritual procedures, ritual techniques, and also very active period of religious activities. So that's the background of my topic that I'm going to give today. Regarding this particular topic, which is on ritual production of divine dreams in these two societies, I actually began the idea on this topic from reading anecdotal sources compiled in the 12th century and covering 10th to 13th centuries Chinese history. So basically, mostly a corpus called Record of the Listener, 遗间志, in Chinese history. And I noticed that there are so many dream accounts, and I find it very fascinating. And then we also found that among those large number of dream accounts, many of them involve ritual means that people request or induce the dreams using ritual techniques. And then on the other side, we noticed that there is a corpus of records about very similar practice in ancient Greece. They're using ritual means to solicit God's presence or intervention. So that was the beginning of this idea to make a comparative analysis on the two sides. So that's why I developed this idea, of course, under the supervision support of my current mentors. But I need to declare that I'm not an expert in ancient Greece, and most of the sources here I use on the Greek side are translations from the from published Greek studies, and of course the Chinese side is not a problem because I was trained in Song history, and also when I use sources from such as Taoist liturgies or other Buddhist sources. Mostly here I would like to acknowledge Ben's inspiration on this aspect, because Ben has been leading me to explore various topics in Taoism of the Song period. So that kind of gave me courage to deal with this type of sources. So I thank Ben again for broaden my area of sources and also research interests. So today's topic of ritual production of divine dreams, I will first show you a picture. So this picture is about a healing god called Asclepius, and in ancient Greece, his cult flourished from the 5th century, and this is a site of his temple at Epidaurus in Greece. And let's imagine what people would do if they are in life crisis, especially a serious illness, and what would they do to seek God's help, and what could Asclepius do to help them? And there's an inscription from the temple, from this temple, I mean the site of this temple called Asclepius Temple at Abydos. And now there survives 2 slabs of stone tablets with inscriptions on it, compiled by temple carers of Asclepius and during the 4th century. And that inscription, that corpus of material records vividly lots of dream accounts from worshippers of Asclepius. Of them report how the god showed himself in those dreams that the worshippers had at a temple in a sleeping chamber after a series of preparatory rituals, and then how the god healed them. So one of the story goes, a man with a festering sore inside his belly slept at the temple in a chamber, sleeping chamber. And then in a dream, he saw the god, Asclepius, ordering his servants to seize the man and restrain him to a table so the god could operate on him. And the god cut open his belly, cut out the sore, and sewed him up again. And the next day, the man woke up feeling well or healed, but the floor of the chamber was covered with blood. So that sounds quite miraculous, right? But the operation details are there, which is very vivid. In a different context, in 7th century China, there was a similar dream recorded in praise of the Bodhisattva Guanyin. It tells the story that a monk was sick, very sick from a long illness. And after days of praying, this monk dreamed that another monk arrived to see about his illness. Then the coming monk, cut him open, pulled out his bowels and liver, washed them clean, and then returned the organs to his body. Of course, after that, the monk recovered from his illness, and then he was healed by the Bodhisattva and the delegate that the Bodhisattva sent. So these 2 stories were among the many records of divine dreams from ancient Greece and China, where dreams were produced or sought for direct communication with gods. And I think that the way people solicit divine dreams tells much about the human-divine relationship. So in this study, I will do a comparative analysis of dream production on both sides, as I explained, of the project overarching idea, and to look at Greek and Chinese religions to examine the different modes of interaction between humans and gods, and to see what are the similarities, or especially what are the differences in these polytheistic societies. Some of my questions will include what shaped the different ways that reached out when people reached out to the gods, and how did gods intervene differently in those dreams, and what are the distinctive features of the rituals devised to produce such dreams. And I would argue that these questions cannot be answered effectively by looking at Greece and China during the same time period, because usually comparative studies, we would expect that the 2 comparing them would be ideally of the same time period, but that does not seem the case in this one, because dream narratives from early China mostly focus on dream interpretation and prognostication, rather than how to obtain a divine dream. So that's what we call dream production. The rituals happen before a dream occurs. But sources from early China usually focus on things happening after a dream, after dreams. So now we have, the status is that we have only very limited sources from early China that show the conscious and explicit use of ritual means to solicit divine dreams. So instead, we are comparing these very asynchronous societies of ancient Greece and Song China, and mainly because both societies now have left plenty of literary and inscribed records on the practice of dream production. And in both societies, ordinary people have had a wider range of ways to gain unmediated access to gods. That is especially the case in Chinese history. From the Song Dynasty onwards, we noticed that more ritual techniques were developed and religious activities. I mean, this conscious, direct involvement with gods became more active than previous period. Now, what are the main elements of dream production? Usually, dream production might take various forms, but they would involve such basic elements as worshipper's intention to obtain a divine dream, the ritual means by which to solicit dreams, and sometimes ritual specialists or sensory stimuli that could facilitate dreaming. In dreams, one is able to preserve a certain degree of consciousness and to feel emotions such as fear and joy, and one could make observations and judgments. For example, a Greek orator called Aristides, who lived during the 2nd century BC, 2nd century CE, AD, recorded many cases of himself being aware, being conscious during dreaming. When he met gods in his dream, and he referred to himself as being sometimes fully suspicious or full of suspicion, or sometimes as distressed and angry if the gods was not responding to his requests or wishes, or having rejoiced when the god did so. And similar signs of self-consciousness in dreams were also reported in anecdotal sources in China. And such perceived connection between dreaming and reality, and people's minds' ability to stay lucid during dreaming might have provided a foundation for dream production to work. And when a worshipper was in a heightened emotional state, dreams tended to be regarded as significant and prophetic. On such occasions, rituals would function to prepare a worshipper's mind for spiritual connection with the god, and rituals also ensure that the dream thus produced or ensued any rituals came from a specific god, was indeed a divine response. Some rituals also involve the role of ritual specialists. In ancient Greece, temple carers and priests often helped to organize and facilitate the process of dream production. So in temples of Asclepius, for example, those temple managers or carers, they oversaw the daily sacrifices and guided worshippers to incubation chambers, and worked together with priests to interpret any puzzling dreams or therapies the god gave during dreams. There is also another cult of a hero and a seer called Amphiaros, and his temple at Oropus which is north of Athens on the coastal area, in the 4th century BCE, prescribed, one of the inscriptions prescribed his priest's role in the day-to-day management of the temple, which included handling offenses, taking payments, managing sacrifices and offerings, and registering or organizing people who went there to sleep overnight for divine dreams to happen. And then the last element, usually external stimuli include material artifacts or other interactive experience, such as reading stories or reading dream accounts inside or outside temples, could also prepare a worshipper's mind ready for divine dreams. For example, Greek for material artifacts, Greek vases and mirrors, lots of them are still extant now, display representations of gods, either in painting or in sculptures, with fixed attributes, such as Zeus would also always appear, mostly appear with a thunderbolt. And this type of fixed attributes would help worshippers to identify individual gods. And similarly, in China, the conception of gods were very often influenced by visual representations such as statues, murals, mural paintings, or print images, and sometimes live performances like rituals, processions, or theater. And these materials might have contributed to a shared knowledge of gods with a degree of coherence. And by coherence, I mean individuals' conception of a god's basic features would largely agree with those of their contemporaries. So they would, because of this visual representation, people's conception of gods and how they look, how they appear, what type of things their insignia and appearance would be largely conforming to each other's common knowledge or iconography, without diverging too much. And all these elements, including a worshipper's wish to obtain a divine dream, and ritual experts and set procedures for rituals, and external stimuli, visual or other sensory experiences, they would contribute to the working of producing divine dreams. And so on this slide on the left, this is one of the stone tablet of the inscriptions dedicated to the healing god Asclepius at his temple at Abydos. And lots of those texts now, of course, already published, contain dream accounts. And on the right, there are some sources that I'm using in this analysis. We can see Yi Jianzhi anecdotal source corpus that include many dream accounts. And then there is the Daofa Huiyuan compiled during late Song to early Yuan, I think, and which include lots of Dao's liturgies, especially Song the Rite, which I will look at an example from Song the Rites. So those are some of the basic sources that I'm going to use. And these are the 4 main elements of dream production that I can identify And then next, I'm going to look at rituals in particular. But instead of conducting a full survey of all forms of ritual production, which I won't be able to do anyway, I will focus on 3 different types of ritual production. And one is a Greek dream incubation in ancient Greece. The other 2 are from China, and one is in Taoist exorcist rituals, and the other is those what I call DIY dream requests in many of the folk cults in Chinese religion. Then, first of all, I will first look at ancient Greek dream incubation. On this picture, there are 2 stone reliefs depicting. One is about the hero Amphiaraus healing a boy. That's on the left, and on the right is it depicts the healing god Asclepius healing a woman and lay on the bed. So such vivid scenes of operation or healing are quite prominent, quite popular from the 5th century BCE onwards in Greece. And now I'm going to look at some of his rituals that have contributed to such divine dreams. Rituals largely depend, I would say, depended on a cult's established form of interaction with gods. And rituals were also influenced by such factors as the temple settings or environment, the role of religious specialists, and the worshippers' needs. As we've seen in one of the opening stories earlier, the cult of healing god Asclepius was very popular in soliciting divine dreams for a healing. So a Greek playwright called Aristophanes, who was active from the 5th to 4th century BCE, provided an early representation of incubation rituals in one of his comedy about a figure, an anthropomorphized figure called Wealth, and who was unfortunately blind. So Aristophanes sketched the sequence of acts for a preparatory ritual at one of the temples of Asclepius on the south coast of the peninsula, southwest of Athens, on the coast area. So he, not this one. So basically the procedure goes, this is from the perspective of a slave who was very smart. And the slave, of course, this is a play, right? So the slave was observing what was happening, and the rituals taken to seek Asclepius's help in curing Wealth's eyes because he was blind. So he didn't know to whom he should give his wealth to. So the ritual goes, we took him, which is Wealth, first to the sea and washed him. Then we went to the god, which is Asclepius' temple, and after the cakes and first offerings were burnt, we bedded Wealth down in the proper fashion and rested ourselves in bunk beds. Then the temple servant put out the lamps and told us all to go to sleep and to be quiet if we heard any noise. And we all lay there in good order, waiting for the god to come and cure. Of course, the interesting part is later what follows when the god came, and then a series of funny things happened between this slave and the god. But here I would like to focus on this description of the rituals. So we can notice that this description of rituals presented a preparatory ritual before having divine dreams in 3 steps. First is a purification through bathing, and then the making of initial offerings, then bedding down to be ready for dreams. And these procedures were marked by such words of conjunctions as first we do this, and then and after that. Those conjunction words not only served a narrative purpose in the text, but also indicated the proper order for incubation ritual. A very similar sequence of events during incubation was also recorded by another author. I mentioned earlier, Aristides, who dreamt of what he should do according to Asclepius' will. So the god basically instructed him to do a series of things. And basically here, he described the 6 steps, including the procedures for purification, offering sacrifices, giving payments, and the dedicatory offering of an inscription. So this clear order in which the events should be carried out indicates that the importance of sequence for performing such rituals. So I hope to briefly give another example of amphi-eros. In that cult, sequential actions were also required, in particular, sequence for the ritual. So the historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC referred to due customs of getting an oracle through dream incubation, in which a person would lie down to sleep in the shrine of Amphi-eros, the hero, a hero and a seer. And then similar sequential actions during ritual were also recorded in various travel writings. These incubation rituals all exhibit a strong emphasis on sequence. And I would say that this sequence reflected the cult's effort to maintain a basic structure in ritual behavior, in ritual practices that might not only enhance the odds of obtaining divine dreams, but also enable worshippers to perform the rituals more easily. Worshippers were given some flexibility to lead rituals on their own in these examples. So I would argue that one of the most distinctive features of Greek dream incubation is the very obvious sequence of doing things and the relative flexibility in worshippers to carry out the performance on their own. So next we are going to look at a type of dream production in China, and that is from Taoist solicitation and Taoist dream solicitation. So during the Song period, we see that Taoist exorcism developed any rituals for dream production, and those rituals were usually practiced under a very structured process. This type of rituals was usually aimed at gaining approval from gods high in the Taoist divine hierarchy. So here's one example. As we can see that, so some background information. One of the most commonly practiced rituals during the Song is the thunder rite or the thunder rites. But to gain the right to perform such ritual, perform a thunder rite, new priests, they first needed to go through a procedure of dream production. The rituals would require that the disciple, a new disciple of the god, they need to submit a petition to their masters, and then the masters would need to arrange a series of written document to communicate to the divine hierarchy. It's a bit like a supervisor arranging a thesis examination for a PhD candidate. Sometimes this ritual would involve complex procedures of written communication between a Taoist master, his disciple, and various gods in the Taoist pantheon. And if the gods approve, that would take the form, sometimes would take the form of a miraculous dream. And these dreams functioned to validate the allocation of or transmission of exorcist power, not only for new priests, but also for established or experienced priests. They also needed divine approval to exercise this exorcist power. And the liturgy on this page, on this slide, prescribed what rituals a master of thunder rites needed to perform before he could command spiritual soldiers. So here, this is a long one, and basically can be divided into 3 sections marked by those conjunction words. So first, they would need to make 3 altars made of ashes and other materials, burn incense, and then incantate spell for purifying heaven and earth, then spray the ground with the charmed water, and then make 3 altars out of the ashes and to establish spirit tablets on which the titles of the generals and soldiers of the Sangguan, the 3 offices, are written. Each altar is to be offered a pot of incense and 3 lamps. That was written on the liturgy. That's the preparation for that. Then in the middle, after the offering, then the Taoist priest would incantate a scripture called the Heavenly Lad Protecting Lives, click his teeth and perform the pacing of the deeper. Then he would exit the gate and incantate silently. So it would incantate this charm, and that's the second stage. Then the third stage is that after this incantation, he needs to close the gate and lock it, and then place a signature on the gate and 画押, and use fragrant flowers as offering. Then after 3 days, he would open it, and if there will be vague traces, and if successful, there will be vague traces on the ashes or on the ground, or sometimes a miraculous dream will come as a response. So that's a very detailed record of dream production. If in the end the divine approval comes as a divine dream. It's called the Qin Bing for a ritual master and in the Shangqing lineage. And so this instruction comprises a series of material preparations, offerings, incantations, and bodily movements. The priests would mobilize multiple senses to appeal to the god for approval. Here, I'm not quite sure whether perhaps it refers to the thunder god or a group of thunder gods or higher gods in order for the master to give command to a group of thunder gods. Here, the three sequential markers, as I put in italics here, actually marked out three realms. The first one is the altars, which were dedicated to celestial beings. And then the second stage or realm is the ritual, is what ritual specialists, what the priest was doing for doing the ritual part process, the incantations to command natural forces. And then the third part, or the third realm, is the ritual space in between the divine and this ritual master's domain, that man-made place that was expected to show signs of transmission of divine power, either in traces or as in dreams, miraculous dreams. And I think that this such communication with gods in this ritual practice of dream production concerning sunrise reflected the divine bureaucracy and its emphasis on credentials. By credentials, I mean the relationship that a worshiper, here a Taoist priest, would need to show that he has the credential as a proper student disciple of the gods. And also the communication runs along the divine bureaucracy. There was this approving this process of approval, I think, reflect the Taoist divine bureaucracy. And the other similar dream production in the Taoist tradition is the cult of Wenchang. So in Song China, we see that the cult of Wenchang produced divine dreams for worshippers, mostly for men who aspire to succeed in exams and to become officials. They would expect to obtain a dream response, which is called Meng Yin, after receiving an ordination register. And that will symbolize entering a master-disciple relationship with the god Wenchang. So that is something that I would say as is a type of a credential to get divine dreams. So here is a liturgy of that particular ritual. And this liturgy instructed worshippers to perform a daily ritual to obtain divine assistance. Including in the morning, one needs to calm his heart and mind, clear his voice, and regulate his breath, to bow in reverence in front of the altar and to recite each chapter of this liturgy for 9 times. That is required for regular ritual practice. And this liturgy also portrays the relationship between the God and his worshippers as that between a teacher and his disciple. And when the time came for a worshipper to have a dream response, and the content of this dream had to fit one of the God's predetermined themes. So here there were 8 dream symbols, mostly related to animals. I suppose whether that's because of the God's original status as a viper, that might be indicative of the God's origin. So this type of rituals for dream production, and similar to the inscriptions to Asclepius, also showcase stories. So within the same liturgy, there are also 10 stories, 10 in total, about successful dream incubation, dream production. Not all of them incubation. It's similar to the incubation stories regarding Asclepius. This scripture of the cult of Wenchang also provided cases of dream responses received by well-known historical figures. Each story would emphasize that those individuals had received a register. Lu is called Lu in Taoist practices, before or after dreaming of a divine symbol. This suggests that the cult placed a great degree of importance on a worshipper's credential as a devoted disciple of the god. So this type is from Taoist exorcist practice. The next type I hope to look at comes from various folk cults in China, in Song China. But their rituals are unlike the complex Taoist rituals discussed earlier. There was a variety of self-practiced DIY rituals for dream production. Most of them did not involve ritual specialists, but feature very simple, unscripted rites, such as visiting a temple to say a prayer, or simply chanting a god's title from anywhere, not necessarily in a temple. In Song China, it became quite common practice for various cults to allow worshippers to request dreams directly from the gods. The purpose of dream solicitation vary widely, but most common areas concerned examination and healing. For those who sought healing, chanting God's titles was a popular way of soliciting God's help. For example, the cult of Guanyin produced many healing dreams with simplified rituals, such as chanting titles or incantating mantras. So one of such example is that from a 12th century story is about a monk who had a severe stomachache, and he chanted the title, Guanyin's title, 1,000,000 times, and incantated the 大悲咒, the Great Compassion Invocation, 800 times daily before he had a miraculous healing dream. So that is one of the typical case that I call ritual production of dreams. So he sought this divine dream through industrious practice of ritual. Self-practiced rituals, such as this, usually did not involve much scripted description in liturgies or other records. So in those sources where such rituals were described very briefly, The rituals varied from simple examples such as offering incense, bowing, saying prayers, to slightly more complex examples such as fasting, abstinence, libation, and the submission of written petitions. These variations in ritual complexity might reflect worshippers' earnestness in solving the problem and their resources to solicit divine assistance. So here I would like to make a comparison between the three types. As this table shows, some of them this table shows some of the distinctive features. Greek incubation rituals and the Chinese self-practiced rituals were both worshiper-led and highly accessible. And these rituals met the needs for direct contact with gods. And both procedures involved a limited amount of guidance. Although self-practiced rituals in Chinese cults exhibited some flexibility due to their large variety, both types relied on worshippers' adherence to known procedures, which means they knew what to do, and with limited guidance from ritual specialists. So they can lead the ritual procedure. So that's what I call here worshipper-led. In this sense, they exhibited a less mediated, thus more direct type of human-divine relationship. That's some of the similarities between Greek dream incubation and the self-practiced dream requests in China. But in comparison, Taoist dream solicitation seems to stand out. Taoist dream production for the initiated, for those who have credentials, for the initiated, the rituals required credentials, and emphasis on credentials, and functioned strictly on liturgy. It was more closely moderated by intermediaries. So compared to other two types, the Taoist solicitation of gods needed to be fully authorized, and therefore showing a more structured and a hierarchical form of a human-divine relationship. Next, I would like to talk briefly on some of the content of such dreams, especially the type about healing. In divine dreams that follow those rituals, gods often solved problems for worshippers. One of the most common the shared area of divine assistance was healing. But gods acted differently in those healing dreams ritually produced. Healing by Asclepius, as we've seen before, often involved surgical details. Many of the dream narratives focus on the gods' actions and gestures, as shown in the inscription, which vividly recorded how Asclepius performed operations to heal a man. And elsewhere, dreams of operations also involved cutting the head, chest, or belly, and they were very common in inscriptions dedicated to Asclepius. These vivid depictions of operation, I think, reflected the worshipper's need for direct divine intervention, and also reflect that people at the time they had access to such bodily knowledge available to them in that context. Cases of God performing operations like Asclepius also existed in China. But more often, gods in Chinese healing dreams tended to provide indirect solutions rather than direct cures. For example, the Bodhisattva Guanyin in other stories would appear in solicited dreams, but then it would appear to a person, but instead of curing, giving direct cure, a Guanyin would direct the patient to someone else for therapy. And also in Taoist stories, there's a certain god, Qin Tong Shenjun, the divine lord of the green lad, once healed a morbidly ill man by letting him just watch a magnificent immortal procession. So such difference in how gods heal, or how they were perceived to heal, either through medical procedures or through miracles, might reflect the absence of specialized healing procedures. And the vivid depiction of Asclepius' divine actions in ancient Greece suggests that people were able to conceptualize such procedures in great detail and interpret the god's healing power more fully. Both societies, and ancient Greece and Song China, produced healing dreams with a miraculous nature, where patients were healed in indirect, ingenious ways. So in the Asclepian, in the inscriptions dedicated to Asclepius, such healing dreams, usually we see cases that did not involve the god's presence, but nevertheless show the god's supreme healing power in a very playful narrative style. For example, two stories from the inscription shared stories of mute patients being prompted by the god by a question, or threatened to suddenly give response orally, in which case they were healed. Two other stories record stories about people who were paralyzed or lame, and one was healed by the god by ordering him to carry a large stone, and the patients did, so healed. The other had his crutch sticks grabbed away, so the patient had to give chase. So such vivid and ingenious narratives about how the god healed people exist. But in neither of these cases, the god gave direct or detailed instructions, but the healing occurred all at once. For such miraculous healing dreams, we may only suppose that the working of divine power was beyond people's comprehension and could not be fully interpreted. Such shared narratives representing miraculous healing might suggest that miracles were an important factor in divine healing in both societies. But whereas Asclepius was perhaps more comfortable performing medical procedures, that was something that Guanyin, for example, rarely performed in Song China. These different actions of the gods in dreams indicate people's different conceptions of the mode of divine intervention. Which I think is interesting when juxtaposed together instead of So when put together, how gods would intervene in dreams, when looking at both sides together, we can see these differences, and that represents different modes of human divine interaction. And that is something that that is interesting coming out of the comparison. And then I would like to briefly compare two other points of dream production on both sides. First of all is about the role of cult sites. And the second is use of proxies. So I observed some similarities and also differences. These 2 points. Dream incubation, as this name suggests, in ancient Greece, cult sites such as temples and sanctuaries were indispensable, were necessary for producing divine dreams. In the cult of Asclepius, although his healing occasionally was effected miraculously when the worshipper was away from his temple, most healing dreams would happen at one of his temples. But in Chinese monasteries and temples, it was different because these places often provided accommodation to travelers and temporary residents. Various song records of dreams, which were had at the Buddhist temples, show the phenomenon of what I call is a term observed of a Greek dream production, and is called accidental incubation, which means the dream happened on site but was unintended. In such cases, the accidental but intimate encounters with gods at cult sites had resulted in divine dreams without complex rituals. Therefore, compared to the central role in dream production in ancient Greece, cult sites seem to be less restrictive factor for dream production in Song China, in particular, where the majority of induced or solicited divine dreams occurred outside temples. But here I would like to point out an exception, which was the Zitong cult, or an earlier version of the Wenchang cult. This cult seems to have a developed dream incubation during the Song period at the sacred mountain of Qinchengshan in Sichuan province. But his dream production coexisted or competed with a large number of other non-incubatory cults that were popular at the time for making dream requests. Given the specific social group of Zitong gods worshippers, most of whom were traveling examinees, the cult's dream incubation might have derived from the social economic function of temples in providing accommodation for travelers. Its cult size, therefore, assumed a unique role as a hospitable place where the god Zitong hosted worshippers as his guests. Another reflection about cult size is that if we take dreams that occurred on cult sites as embodying the divine will, then rituals may be regarded as embodying human agency. In China, those two factors needed not to be present at the same time, the large number of requested dreams outside temples show a looser tie to cult sites in dream production. It also meant more options for worshippers to gain divine assistance. And that is different from the Greek dream incubation, which mostly depended on cult sites, occurred on cults in temples. The other feature or point of comparison is using the use of proxies. By proxies, I mean when gods delegate their roles in dream production to other divine entities. When this happens, their delegates may be called a proxy. For example, gods such as Asclepius could either appear in dream in person or delegate a proxy to conduct an action or to deliver a message. Many inscriptions recorded dreams in which people saw Asclepius's assistants or manifestations, such as a boy, a serpent, or a dog. Whether to use or avoid proxy not only indicates how flexible a cult's practices are, but also reveals the structure of a god's divine power. Asclepius's family members could also serve as proxy for the god's divine power. His wife, for example, his sons and daughters were all included in the preparatory sacrifices to invoke the full healing power of the god Asclepius. And his cult also delegated divine power to other assistant gods, such as a goddess called Mnemosyne, who was the personification of memory. And the goddess was added as a recipient of offerings in order to provide aid in memorizing sometimes very lengthy instructions given by the god during a dream, instructing the worshippers what to eat, what to drink, and what medicines to take. So such assistance and helping the cult of Asclepius functioned to better communicate the different parts of divine message. They might have compensated for some of the rigidities in cult practices, and they were necessary when delivering complex therapies and instructions. In this sense, the use of a proxy might have helped diversify and improve the ways in which incubation dreams could be produced. And Chinese gods similarly also have assistants similar to those of Asclepius. And for example, god Wenchang also, the cult of Wenchang also had records of requested dreams where uncharacteristic and sometimes unspecified delegates of the god frequently appeared to deliver a divine message. And the god Wenchang also had a list of attendants and assistants to which a worshipper also needed to make offerings and petitions. So my reflection on the practice of proxy is that it showed the god's willingness and ability to adapt to worshippers' needs. But then a difference is there. In contrast to Asclepius, the cult of Wenchang was deeply influenced by the Taoist divine hierarchy, as indicated by the titles. Sometimes we see the list of titles in Wenchang's assistants, and they were they conform to official titles. So the cult's flexibility in deploying divine power was achieved through vertical delegation of divine power. And I think this is perhaps in contrast to the more horizontal distribution of divine power, for example, in the cult of Asclepius. Then I'm coming to the conclusion. Here I would like to bombard you with some visual stimuli. This picture shows some of the some gods from Buddhism and Taoism, and then even Confucius there visually represented, and probably these materials were involved in ritual processes. So my conclusion would be the ritual production of dreams was perhaps among the most telling practices of human-divine interaction in polytheism. And as one of the scholars of classical Greece, Kimberly Patton, has noted, she said, unlike the cult of the monotheistic God who ought not to be manipulated in a cult, the ancient Greek practice of dream incubation called on gods to attend, appear, and respond. Such ritual means to solicit divine help or to influence a divine intervention, I think is very characteristic of polytheism. So from our comparison on the two sides, of course, based on very limited samples, the three very salient, very typical type of dream production, and also the content, the use of proxy, and their function of couch size, we see some similarities, but still, their differences, especially the ritual processes and also function of couch size, review some of the distinctive features in dream production. By comparing this particular type of religious practice, this ritual production of dreams in two hugely different societies, I hope to show that although the parallels between the two societies demonstrate some of the widely shared notions of gods, their differences in particular reveal diverse modes of human divine intervention that make each polytheism unique. And that is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yang Qin. That was a really wonderful talk, very stimulating.